America in the 1970s was a whole different world. It was a time of adventures in the back of pickup trucks, where scrapes were like medals of courage and cigarette smoke drifted through every airplane cabin. Life back then had fewer rules, fewer warnings, and people were naturally a bit more adventurous. Today, let's take a trip back to the 70s to look at 25 habits that were perfectly normal for Americans at the time, but might shock us or even be against the law today. Sunbathing rituals. The 70s saw a strange obsession with changing skin color under the sun. Every young man and woman believed that a healthy dark tan was proof of an active and vibrant lifestyle. The ritual usually started in the backyard, on flat rooftops, or right on the sandy beaches. The must-have items back then were just a bottle of baby oil and sometimes a silver reflector placed right under the chin. This reflector was meant to focus every sunbeam directly onto the face like a heat lamp, making sure no spot was missed. That layer of baby oil made the skin almost sizzle under the heat, creating that signature shiny glow everyone wanted. Doctors' warnings about sunburns were mostly ignored, and if anyone did use sunscreen, it only had a tiny SPF 4 rating. Having an even tan after the summer was seen as a proud badge of honor. However, today, dermatologists always tell patients to stop this habit immediately because of the clear link between UV rays and skin cancer. Modern laws have restricted the use of tanning beds for minors to prevent risks. What used to be a beauty standard is now seen as extremely reckless and dangerous behavior. The kissing host. In television game shows of the 1970s, winks and intimate gestures were everyday things. One of the most iconic images of that time was the host comfortably kissing female contestants as part of the entertainment. Richard Dawson, the king of the show Family Feud, was the one who made this his personal trademark. He was ready to kiss every woman who stepped up to the podium. Whether they were married or single, young ladies or older women, the studio audience would often cheer and clap enthusiastically for these interactions, seeing them as charming and polite. The contestants back then would just blush shyly, rather than resist or think it was strange. Over time, changing social awareness has made television networks much more cautious about managing how performers behave. Random kisses that were once primetime gold would now immediately cause outrage instead of applause. The idea of a host kissing strangers is now seen as a serious lack of boundaries and completely inappropriate. Clackers toys. This toy was something every kid in the 70s dreamed of having. It was simple, consisting of two hard plastic balls hanging on a thin string connected by a small ring to hold. Kids would hold the ring and flick their wrists skillfully so the two balls would constantly collide above and below their hands. The loud clack-clack sound created a hypnotic rhythm, turning it into a race of speed and strength among children. That feeling of satisfaction from mastering that rhythmic chaos was something anyone growing up in this era truly craved. However, this addictive toy had a deadly flaw in its acrylic plastic material. This type of plastic was very brittle under the pressure and heat from strong collisions. As a result, the balls could shatter right in the middle of play, sending sharp plastic shards flying like shrapnel toward the user and those nearby. A string of injuries caused a panic among parents and led teachers to ban them from schools. Eventually, the government had to step in directly to remove this item from store shelves because the level of uncontrolled danger was too high. Did you ever own this toy? Press hype to check in with the professional clackers players of those days. Hitchhiking. Sticking your thumb out on the side of the road to catch a ride was once seen as an exciting adventure rather than a reckless threat. People often stood along the roads with a bright smile, hoping for the kindness of strangers. It was a popular way to get from town to town without spending much, especially before there were cheap bus tickets and modern ride-sharing apps. From soldiers on leave and students going home to wanderers with big dreams, everyone hopped on those rides with a sense of trust. Many even saw it as a growing-up experience, getting the chance to hear adventure stories from the drivers. Parents would just tell their kids to be careful instead of worrying as much as they do now. For many, it was a flexible way of living, and a clear sign of community spirit. This rosy picture slowly faded as stories of attacks, disappearances, and crimes related to hitchhiking began to increase. Laws were gradually tightened, and no hitchhiking signs popped up everywhere to warn the public. Today, in many states, this behavior is restricted or completely banned to protect citizens. From a symbol of trust, hitchhiking has now become a source of hesitation and caution. Cigarette ads featuring doctors. You'll be surprised to know that back in the day, cigarettes were advertised by doctors. The image of a doctor in a white lab coat with a cigarette in hand was a very familiar sight across society back then. Tobacco companies took full advantage of the public's trust in the medical profession to promote their products. On television, people claiming to be real doctors would give advice on which cigarette brands were gentler on the throat or caused less irritation. The logic of that era was simple. If even a doctor smokes that brand, it can't be too bad for your health. This belief was so strong that people saw smoking as a normal habit, even somewhat classy and medically guaranteed. However, the truth began to come out as the number of lung cancer and heart disease cases skyrocketed. Irrefutable medical evidence and growing public outrage put huge pressure on broadcasters. By the late 1970s, cigarette ads featuring doctors were forced off the airwaves entirely. Those prestigious white coats in the ads disappeared, replaced by stern warnings from the Surgeon General about the deadly effects of smoking. Flight attendants selected by appearance. The aviation industry in the 1970s was always associated with glamour, but behind that were strict standards and deep-seated prejudices for the crew. Back then, they were called stewardesses, and absolutely never flight attendants. The top hiring criteria weren't skills or expertise, but mostly focused on being pretty. They were subjected to strict rules about height, regular weight checks, and were required to have perfect makeup at all times. Uniforms were also designed to emphasize glamour with tight miniskirts and stylish high boots. Another unfair thing was that female attendants often had to stay single and could be fired immediately if they got married or became pregnant. This inequality couldn't last forever, as women's rights movements began to rise strongly at the end of the decade. A series of lawsuits over discrimination forced airlines to change their thinking and work rules. Job titles were standardized, uniforms became more professional and focused on safety rather than a show. The sky finally stopped being a personal fashion runway, and attendants were recognized for their ability to protect passengers rather than just being walking vases. No helmets while traveling. The 70s was a time when freedom on wheels was defined by having no barriers or safety gear. Bicycles with colorful banana seats and long chrome handlebars glided through the streets without anyone giving a second thought to protecting their head. Skateboards back then were also very basic, just thin, hard plastic boards with narrow wheels, but kids still flew down hills at high speeds without helmets. Tumbles, scraped elbows, or bumps on the head weren't seen as serious incidents. On the contrary, they were seen as badges of honor, proof of every child's bravery and growth. Parents back then had a strong belief that letting kids explore freely and learn from their falls was the best way for them to toughen up. This freedom has been replaced by strict legal regulations to ensure safety. Not wearing a helmet now leads to fines and concerns about parental responsibility. While protection today is necessary, it sometimes makes people wonder if we're losing that spirit of resourcefulness and independence of the previous generation. Shared phone lines. In the 1970s, privacy and communication was a bit of a luxury. Instead of every house having its own separate line, a shared phone system or party line was a common way to save money. When you picked up the receiver to make a call, you might very well hear a neighbor in the middle of a conversation. To tell who a call was for, each family in the shared group was assigned a specific ring pattern, like 2 short rings or 1 long ring. Everyone in the house had to listen carefully to the rhythm of the bell to know when they should answer. This shared connection led to countless funny situations when rumors or secrets were leaked over the phone. Sometimes eavesdropping accidentally created unexpected friendships, or on the flip side, small neighborhood feuds. Today, with smartphones and messaging apps acting as strong walls of privacy, the idea of sharing a phone number or chatting with a stranger seems like something no one would ever consider. Everything is safer and more private, but somewhere along the way, we lost that sense of familiarity. Those sudden calls, simple check-ins between neighbors, and that very real-life closeness that modern technology can hardly replace. Smoking on airplanes. Breathing in a space full of cigarette smoke at 30,000 feet was an unforgettable experience for passengers flying in the 70s. Back then, every airplane was like a giant flying ashtray. On the armrest of every seat, manufacturers built in a small ashtray for passengers' convenience. Even though there were smoking and non-smoking sections, the smoke still drifted throughout the cabin, so no one could really escape it. What was even more shocking was that stewardesses would even offer free cigarettes to guests as part of the premium service. Whether there were infants or people with respiratory issues in the flight, everyone just had to deal with it. This led to health-related lawsuits, and scientific evidence about the harms of secondhand smoke began to pile up. The risk of fire in a closed space was also a big concern for regulators. By the mid-1980s, bans were gradually put in place for domestic flights and later international ones. We've come quite a way. What do you think about today's convenience compared to life in the 70s? Share your thoughts on this change in the comments. Blue laws and store closures. In today's fast-paced life, it's hard to imagine a time when all commercial activities stopped on Sundays. In the 1970s, stores closing on Sundays was normal and even required by law. If you forgot to buy something essential on Saturday, you simply had no choice but to wait patiently until Monday morning. From big department stores to small grocery shops and hardware stores, everyone locked up tight. Sunday back then was truly a time set aside for family, church, and pure rest. The quiet on the shopping streets created a very different rhythm of life, slower and more peaceful. It was a time for long family meals, leisurely walks, and unplanned visits to the neighbors. However, pressure from the market economy and the modern world's need for convenience slowly wiped out these barriers. Today's 24/7 shopping world makes the concept of a society-wide day of rest feel outdated to the younger generation. This change brings unlimited convenience, but it also makes us wonder if we are trading away peace and quality time with loved ones for quick transactions. Drinking straight from the garden hose. Drinking water directly from a garden hose was the purest and most refreshing summer treat we ever knew in the 70s. It was a simple habit, happening right after hours of playing outside, where fun was more important than any worries about germs or hygiene. The process always started by turning on the tap and letting the first bit of hot water that had been sitting in the rubber hose flow out. Then, once the water turned ice cold, you'd lean your head down and take long gulps straight from the nozzle. The water back then usually had a bit of a metallic taste and that signature rubber smell from the hose, but strangely enough, it was incredibly delicious and thirst-quenching. In a time when bottled water was a foreign concept, the garden hose was as reliable a water source as the summer sun itself. This habit reflected people's absolute trust in their surroundings and a carefree way of life. However, in modern society, concerns about tap water quality and the widespread availability of bottled drinks have made this image almost completely disappear. A kid drinking from a hose today might make parents worry about potential health risks. Even so, for those who lived through the 70s, that taste of cold water mixed with a hint of rubber remains a sweet memory of a time when happiness was found in the simplest things. Riding in the back of a pickup truck. Before specialized car seats existed, the bed of a pickup truck was the favorite way for kids to travel. In the 1970s, this was where we could sit freely without seatbelts or any safety gear. You just jumped onto the bare steel floor, sat on spare tires or toolboxes, and held onto the sides as the truck started moving. The feeling of sitting in the open wind, watching the wide road behind you, and waving at passing cars was as exciting as a roller coaster. However, the reality was that this freedom always came with hidden dangers. Just one sharp turn or a sudden brake, and without a solid anchor, anyone could be thrown out of the truck bed. Hospitals and lawmakers recorded many cases of serious injuries from this. Because of this, by the 1990s, most states had passed absolute bans on letting children ride in the back of trucks on the road. Today, if you try this, the police will pull you over immediately because of the serious safety violation. There are many ways to experience things, but we have to stay safe first, right? Letting kids stand in the back seat while driving. America in the 1970s was a very different world, where traffic safety standards were still very far off concepts. Letting children be free without any seatbelts, standing in the back seat while the car was moving, was a common sight and sometimes even encouraged by parents. Kids would often grip the back of the front seat, bobbing with the car's movement and excitedly talking about what they saw on the road. Life back then seemed slower and simpler, making people rarely worry about accident risks that could happen in the blink of an eye. Actually, that wasn't the case. The harsh reality of traffic collisions brought alarming injury data. This forced regulators to come out with much stricter rules on protecting children in motor vehicles. The introduction of laws requiring safety seats and seatbelts completely changed this habit. Swimming in rivers without life jackets. There was a time when summer started with the sound of river water and cool currents, not air conditioning. In the 1970s, people swam in rivers very carefree. No life jackets, no safety gear. They'd even jump in after having a few drinks. It all relied on confidence and a simple belief that the river would be gentle, a very special sense of freedom of that time. People could spend the whole afternoon drifting with the current or joining in water fun without a single thought about risks from whirlpools or cramps. This freedom brought brilliant summer memories, but also had potential costs that were very high. Sad drowning incidents slowly changed the community's awareness of water safety. Over time, regulations requiring life jackets and rescue equipment became the standard at most public swimming areas. Today, spontaneous swimming in uncontrolled areas without safety gear can be seen as a violation and lead to strict warnings. While we always remember those carefree summers, the protection we have today is necessary to make sure fun doesn't turn into tragedy. Limited television choices. The world of entertainment in the 1970s was very simple. Instead of having thousands of choices on online platforms, the audience back then only had about 3 or 4 main TV channels to watch. To switch between stations, you had to walk right up to the TV set and turn a manual knob until the picture appeared. If the signal was grainy, the only solution was to adjust the rabbit ear antennas on top of the TV until you got a clear picture. The broadcast schedule was also very fixed, with Saturday mornings for cartoons and evenings for classic family sitcoms. This limitation accidentally created a very strong social bond. Since everyone everywhere was watching the same program at the same time, there was always a common topic for everyone to talk about the next morning at school or work. It was a shared cultural experience that we can hardly find again in today's fragmented world. Even though we have endless on-demand choices now, we seem to lack that feeling of waiting together to enjoy an iconic TV show. Before mobile phones became something we can't live without, public phone booths on every street corner were the only way to communicate once we left the house. Every time you needed to make a call, the first thing you did was dig through your pockets for some loose change. Inside the booth, a thick telephone directory was usually hanging by a chain, with thin pages worn out from being flipped through so many times. The signature sound of a coin dropping into the slot, signaling the start of a call, is an unforgettable auditory memory. Sometimes, a lucky person might find a forgotten coin in the return slot, like a little surprise gift. Making a long-distance call back then always felt important and required real physical effort. Today, these phone booths have become forgotten relics, slowly disappearing from the city landscape to make room for personal technology. Although no longer practical, the image of the phone booth remains a symbol of the hard-working connection of the previous generation. an experience that brought a different kind of satisfaction than just tapping a button on a touchscreen. Metal lunchboxes and thermoses. A metal lunchbox back then was a statement of every child's personality and interests in the 1970s. They were usually decorated with vibrant images from the most popular TV shows, cartoons, or movies of the time. Inside, there was always a matching thermos, usually filled with milk or hot soup for lunch. Every time you opened the box, a signature scent would waft out, a mix of sandwich flavors, a fresh apple, and a bit of the slight sourness of warm milk from the thermos. These boxes were very durable, but they also dented easily after a few bumps. Interestingly, every dent on the metal surface usually told its own story, maybe from a playground contest or some silly accident. They stayed with the child through many years, becoming physical evidence of a vibrant childhood. Today, soft insulated lunch bags have completely replaced metal boxes because they are convenient and easy to clean. However, those modern bags seem to lack the solid presence and iconic feel of those old iron boxes. Full-service gas stations. The era when filling up the gas tank felt like a dedicated service ceremony is a beautiful memory of the 70s. At full-service gas stations, you never had to step out of the car to grab the nozzle yourself. As soon as the car pulled in, attendants in tidy uniforms and caps would quickly walk up to the window to say hello. They would handle everything from pumping gas and cleaning the windshield to checking the engine oil if you asked. Meanwhile, the kids in the back seat would usually stare at the numbers dancing on the pump as if they were watching an exciting slot machine. All payments were made right at the car window with cash or through bulky manual card scanners. There was a professional and warm rhythm to the whole process, from pumping and cleaning to the thank you when you left. This level of personal interaction brought a sense of being respected and cared for that we rarely find at today's self-service stations. Nowadays, the convenience of speed and the effort to cut costs have caused full-service stations to slowly disappear or become a luxury service. The idea of sitting still in the car and having everything done for you now seems foreign to a generation used to doing everything themselves. Hyper-realistic plastic rifles. The 1970s was seen as the Wild West of toy advertising, where amazingly realistic weapon replicas were widely sold. These weren't neon-colored water guns or soft foam blasters like today. They were plastic rifles crafted in detail down to every wood grain and the metallic sound of the bolt being pulled back. Some high-end models even had a mechanism to eject fake shells after every trigger pull, creating a very real experience for kids. Parents back then usually just smiled and saw them as harmless role-playing games that helped kids get some exercise. However, this extreme realism led to serious, unforeseen consequences. There were many cases where police mistook toy guns for real weapons in low-light situations, leading to tragic accidents for children. This created a wave of protest and demands for stricter control over violent toys. By the 1990s, new regulations required toy guns to have a bright orange tip to easily tell them apart from real guns. Today, most toy weapons are stylized in color and shape to avoid any deadly misunderstandings. This change marked a turning point in thinking about safety and responsibility toward a child's development. High Karate Aftershave. High Karate wasn't just a simple grooming product, it was a fascinating cultural phenomenon of the 70s. This product came in bottles with simple designs and a pretty low price, but it had incredibly over-the-top ad campaigns. The commercials often humorously claimed that just by splashing this aftershave on, women would immediately be attracted to you and even attack you because the scent was so masculine. However, behind those funny elements, High Karate actually had a pleasant and signature scent that was surprisingly good. It became the top choice for teenage boys eager to prove they were adults, as well as men who wanted to keep a playful touch in their style. Even so, as times and tastes changed, this noisy advertising style slowly became outdated. The 1980s started to favor more luxurious and powerful scents, making High Karate quietly withdraw from the market. Today, this product only exists in memory as a funny joke about a time when grooming could also bring a good laugh. mercury thermometers. The mercury thermometer was once an essential medical item, always present in every family's medicine cabinet in the 70s. It had a mesmerizing beauty, with that shiny silver liquid moving up and down inside a delicate glass tube. Kids back then often watched in fascination as that liquid metal changed with their body temperature whenever they were sick, without knowing the danger hidden inside. America in the 1970s was a world where people rarely had to worry about strict chemical safety standards. We used it naturally and saw it as the most reliable tool to monitor the family's health. However, that shiny silver beauty held a very high toxicity for humans and the environment. Just a small slip that broke the glass tube would let tiny mercury beads spill out, and they were very hard to clean up completely, causing a serious risk of poisoning through inhalation. Because of these hidden dangers, global health agencies have gradually moved to eliminate the use of mercury thermometers in homes. Today, they are widely banned from sale in many countries and have been completely replaced by safer and faster electronic thermometers. Looking back at the past, the fact that we were once in such close contact with a poison like that can make many people shiver in shock today. Hand-cranked food mills. Before modern electric appliances took over the kitchen, the hand-cranked food mill was the silent companion of 70s housewives. This was a tool with a simple but very effective design, consisting of a metal bowl, a rotating blade, and a sifter system underneath. To use it, you had to put in quite a bit of arm strength and patience to turn the handle steadily, crushing soft fruits and vegetables into a smooth puree. This process created a direct connection between the cook and the food, where every turn held care and effort. The food mill was the ideal tool for making baby food, applesauce, or mashing potatoes for family dinner. There was a belief that food made by hand, slowly through every turn, would bring a more delicious and rich flavor compared to using a quick electric blender. However, the fast pace of life and the explosion of technology have caused these manual devices to be pushed into the corner of the cabinet and forgotten. Blenders and electric food processors that bring maximum convenience have completely replaced human power. Still, for many, the hand-cranked food mill always brings back the latch-clatter sound in Mom's kitchen and those loving meals made with patience. Cigarette and alcohol vending machines. Buying cigarettes or alcohol in the 1970s was unbelievably simple and easy through vending machines. These machines were everywhere, from bars and gas stations to even break rooms at workplaces. What's most shocking by today's standards is that there was absolutely no ID check or any age barrier. A child could easily drop a few coins into the machine and pull out a pack of cigarettes right next to the candy shelves without anyone stopping them. People saw having quick access to these products as an obvious convenience of life. However, the consequences of this lack of supervision slowly showed up as teen smoking rates skyrocketed and public health issues became serious. Because of this, lawmakers had to step in with strict laws, leading to the removal of most cigarette and alcohol vending machines in public areas. Today, if they still exist, they are only allowed in very strictly controlled areas and must have a personal ID scanning system. America in the 1970s was a very different world. A world where kids rode their bikes without helmets, where a sunburn was seen as a sign of a great summer, and where cigarette smoke snaked its way into every family diner. It was a time of freedom, maybe a little reckless, when people lived slower, simpler, and rarely thought about safety or regulations. Today, let's go back to that decade to explore 25 things that used to be everyday American habits, but which might surprise us now or make us completely unbelievable that they ever existed. Hitchhiking. You might be surprised to know that hitchhiking was once seen as an adventure, not the risky behavior it is today. In the 1970s, people often stuck out their thumb with a smile, hoping for a ride and maybe an interesting story along the way. It was a popular way to get from one town to the next by placing trust in strangers, especially before cheap bus tickets and modern ride-sharing apps came along. From soldiers on leave, college students on break, to wanderers with a dream, they all relied on the kindness of strangers to get around. People didn't think much about pulling over to pick up a stranger, and parents might only warn their kids to be careful without the deep anxiety we have now. It was even seen as resourceful and full of community spirit. However, over time, stories of attacks, disappearances, and crimes related to hitchhiking completely changed the public's perception. Laws were tightened, and no hitchhiking signs went up everywhere. Today, this practice is restricted or completely banned in many states. From a symbol of freedom and trust, hitchhiking became the source of unwanted troubles. No helmets while biking or skateboarding. The 1970s was the decade of absolute freedom on wheels, and the definition of that freedom was having no protective gear whatsoever. Kids rode bicycles with bright banana seats and long chrome handlebars without a second thought about head protection. Skateboards back then were just thin, hard plastic decks with narrow wheels, and kids would glide down hills without a helmet. Protective gear, if seen at all, was something you saw in a magazine, not in real life. Falling, scraped elbows, and bruised knees weren't accidents. They were an essential part of the game. Small injuries, the scars, were badges of honor, proving your courage and time spent playing outside. Sometimes 2 or 3 kids would even ride on one bicycle with no safety measures at all. Parents believed that letting their children freely explore and learn from their falls was the best way for them to grow up. In the 70s, this freedom was paramount. No one worried about laws or regulations. It was an innocence and recklessness that modern society would find hard to accept. Does today's overprotection take away a part of the freedom to explore and the resourcefulness that the previous generation once had? Telephone directories, white and yellow pages. Before the internet, every home in the 70s had at least a thick telephone directory. It was usually in 2 parts, white pages for personal listings and yellow pages for businesses. Using the phone book was an exercise in patience and alphabetical order. You flipped through the white pages by last name, then first name, to find a number. The thin pages rustled as you carefully turned them. The book had a subtle, distinct scent of ink, and that smell often lingered on your fingertips. The yellow pages were full of colorful advertisements, many of which had coupons. This was the only way to search for a plumber or a new pizza place. The phone book was also handy for many other purposes, such as boosting a child's seat or propping open a door. Now, the idea of searching for something without typing it into an internet search bar feels like a relic from another world. Finding a number took more time, but it felt rewarding when you finally located the information you needed. The disappearance of the phone book is a clear sign of how information shifted from being tangible to being instantaneous. The sunbathing ritual. On the list of the most shocking habits from the 70s, the sunbathing ritual is perhaps the most incredible thing given modern health awareness. The goal for every girl and guy during the summer was to tan fast, tan deep, and tan dark, because everyone believed a tanned complexion was a healthy one. The ultimate summer ritual was lying out in the backyard, on the rooftop, or at the beach, armed only with a bottle of Johnson's baby oil and maybe a silver reflector under your chin. The baby oil was slathered on your skin to increase the shine, making your skin sizzle in the sun. The silver reflector's job was to beam the sun's rays straight onto your face like a heat lamp, making sure not a single spot was missed. Sunscreen, if used at all, was only SPF 4. No one listened to doctors' warnings about sunburns. Back then, achieving an even, healthy glow of a tan was nothing less than a badge of honor. Today, dermatologists plead with patients to stop tanning, and laws restrict minors from accessing tanning beds due to the undeniable link between UV exposure and skin cancer. This habit, which was once considered the standard for beauty and health, is now seen as extremely reckless and dangerous. Stores closed on Sunday. In today's 24/7 consumer society, we can buy anything at any time. But in the 1970s, this concept was almost non-existent. Stores closing on Sunday was a fixed part of life. Sunday was reserved for family, church, and rest. If you forgot to buy something on Saturday, you simply had to wait until Monday. There was no running out to the supermarket on Sunday night for that missing dinner ingredient. Downtown areas, which were bustling on weekdays, became eerily quiet on Sundays. Most department stores, hardware stores, and even many grocery stores were locked up. Only a few essential services like gas stations or some pharmacies were open. That stillness created a different rhythm for community life. It was time for big family meals, long walks, and impromptu neighbor visits. Today's 24-hour shopping world makes the idea of a completely closed Sunday almost unbelievable to the younger generation. But for the 70s generation, it was a guarantee of rest, a reminder that not everything revolved around consumption and work. This shift makes us wonder if we traded the quiet and quality family time for unlimited convenience. Film cameras and waiting for developing. In the 70s, the art of photography demanded patience and an appreciation for every recorded moment. With film cameras, you couldn't delete or check a photo after shooting. Every shot mattered because film and the number of exposures were finite and not cheap. You had to plan and think carefully before pressing the shutter button. After finishing the roll of film, you would drop it off at the pharmacy or camera store and had to wait a few days, sometimes a whole week. Half the fun of the process was the surprise. You never knew if the photo was blurry, if someone had their eyes closed, or if the lighting was good enough until you held the prints in your hands. People often flipped through them immediately, right there in the store parking lot, giggling at the failed shots or sighing with relief when they saw the clearly captured moments. Today, instant feedback from digital cameras and smartphones is taken for granted. In just a few seconds, you can shoot, edit, and share hundreds of photos. The shift from patiently waiting to instant gratification has diminished the appreciation for each frame. Every photo shot on film was a treasure, while digital photos are infinite and much easier to forget. In-person banking, no ATM. The 70s was a time when banks operated during strict business hours, and every transaction had to happen in person. Payday Friday meant a familiar sight, long lines snaking around the bank lobby. If you needed cash, you stood in line at the teller window. There was no convenience of a 24-hour ATM. Tellers often greeted you by name, remembering details about your last visit, creating a sense of intimacy and personalization. Everything was done by hand. Deposit slips and withdrawal forms were filled out manually. There was a sense of formality and seriousness in the bank space. The pen was always chained to the counter. Transactions were conducted face-to-face, requiring mutual trust between the customer and the banker. The convenience of today's 24-hour ATMs would have been completely unimaginable in a world where your money was only accessible during certain hours. We gained instant convenience, but lost the personal interaction, where the person managing your money actually knew who you were. The ATM replaced the teller with a machine, making things faster, but also colder. Manual typewriters. Manual typewriters weren't just office equipment. They were the pulse of written communication in the 1970s. They filled the workplace with a steady clatter of keys. Each letter struck the page with a satisfying thump. The carriage return required a firm, deliberate push on the lever, accompanied by the familiar chime. The sound of a busy office was a mix of keystrokes, return bells, and the rustling of stacked paper. When you made a mistake, correcting it wasn't as easy as hitting the delete button on a computer. You had to reach for liquid correction fluid, liquid paper, or special correction tape, waiting for it to dry before you could type over it. Secretaries and typists often had faint gray graphite streaks on their fingertips from having to use carbon paper to create copies. Personal computers and word processing software swiftly replaced typewriters. Being able to correct mistakes without leaving a trace was a revolution. But manual typewriters gave a tangible feeling to the work. Every letter was created with force and determination, fostering a direct connection between the writer and the page that modern keyboards cannot replicate. Limited TV choices. In the 1970s, your world of entertainment was simple. There were only 3 or 4 TV channels, which meant choices were sparse, but somehow still enough. There was no scrolling through countless menus. You would turn the dial until something came on. Saturday mornings were for cartoons, evenings for family sitcoms, and if you missed a show, you had to wait months for a rerun. Watching TV required a bit of physical effort. If the signal was snowy reception, you had to adjust the rabbit ears antenna on top of the TV. It was a process that required patience and sometimes the coordination of the whole family. Sometimes one member had to stand in just the right posture in a corner of the room, holding their arm up to keep the antenna steady for a stable picture, while the other commanded the adjustment. "Stop right there! Don't move!" Having only a few channels created an unforeseen social bond. Everyone, no matter what town they were in, was watching the same program at the same time, creating a common topic of conversation the next morning. In today's era of fragmented content, it's hard to imagine an entertainment medium that could be so simple and have a shared rhythm that no one questioned. Now, we have countless options, but we seem to lack those shared, memorable cultural moments of the past. Home encyclopedias. In the age of Google, where every piece of information is just a few keystrokes away, it's hard to imagine having to flip through pages to find a single detail. But in the 1970s, a full set of encyclopedias on the shelf was a sign of pride and respect for education in many families. These sets were often purchased from door-to-door salesmen, and the heavy leather-bound volumes were neatly arranged on the living room shelf. When you opened them, you could smell the distinctive scent of paper and glue. They were carefully guarded treasures of knowledge. Students spent hours flipping through the pages to find details for school projects, and it was often an intellectual adventure. Owning a set of encyclopedias signaled a certain seriousness about education, and it was a large investment. Today, encyclopedias have been completely replaced, but back then, they were a symbol of intellectual authority in every home. We lost the physical interaction with knowledge, that satisfied feeling of finding the answer after flipping through hundreds of thin, rustling pages. Smoking sections in restaurants. Smoking in restaurants in the 1970s was not a secretive or shameful act. It was a widely accepted social behavior, as common as ordering dessert. On every table, a thick glass or heavy metal ashtray was readily available. These ashtrays, sometimes decorated with the restaurant's logo, served as fixed table decorations. You could easily spot a cigarette vending machine standing right next to the entrance, near where the gumball machine or small toy dispenser was placed. When the host asked, "Smoking or non-smoking?" the answer was just a social formality, because no matter where you sat, the air always smelled faintly of smoke. Stepping into a diner was stepping into a haze of cigarette smoke. Waitstaff had to weave through the thick smoke to bring out dessert, sometimes even having to brush ashes away before setting the cake plate down. Children sat right there, innocently coloring on paper placemats, while smoke hung suspended right above their heads. No one thought it was strange. Families happily ate pancakes, while at the next table, someone laughed and lit a new cigarette. Back then, cigarette vending machines were placed right in front of the restaurant doors. This is a sight that would make anyone uneasy today, when you think about how children grew up surrounded by that smoke and no one saw anything wrong. Metal lunchboxes and thermoses. The cold metal lunchbox, with its accompanying thermos, wasn't just a food container. They were a child's badges of identity in the 1970s. The boxes were often decorated with images of your favorite TV show, cartoon, or movie, reflecting the owner's personality. You proudly carried it to school, the painted metal rattling softly as you walked. If you dropped the lunchbox, it would dent, and every dent on the metal box told a story about a playground fight or a silly accident. The smell inside was a unique and memorable blend of sandwiches, apples, and the slightly sour taste of warm milk from the thermos. The thermos inside had a small plastic cup that doubled as a lid where you could drink milk or juice. The clatter of multiple lunchboxes opening at once was the specific sound of school lunchtime. Today's soft, insulated lunch bags feel practical and easy to clean, but they lack the sturdy, story-filled presence of a metal lunchbox that stayed with its owner for years. The disappearance of the metal box is the loss of a material symbol of childhood where lunch was carried in a miniature piece of pop art. Ashtrays on planes and buses. If smoking in restaurants was an accepted behavior, then smoking on public transit, especially planes and buses, was a characteristic travel ritual of the 70s. Ashtrays weren't an addition. They were a standard feature integrated right into the seat's armrest. They were always there, waiting to be flicked open with a small metal click, even if you weren't a smoker. On planes, the space was formally divided, the smoking section in the back and the non-smoking section in the front. However, because the air was filtered and circulated together, the smoke still drifted back through the passenger cabin. It's amazing to think that the no smoking sign only lit up during the most critical moments, like takeoff and landing. Otherwise, passengers were allowed to smoke mid-flight. On long-distance buses, the scene wasn't much different. Bus windows were often open just enough for the smoke to escape, while the built-in ashtrays full of gray dust were in constant use. Bus drivers also navigated in that atmosphere, and complaints were rare. Smoking during the trip became a type of relaxation ritual, helping long-haul passengers feel more at ease. Party lines. In the world of the 1970s, telephone privacy was a luxury. Instead of having a private line, you would share it with your neighbors. When you picked up the receiver, you might hear someone else talking. They could be a family down the street or people living next door. You had to wait your turn or politely ask if you could use the line if it was busy. If you were talking, you also had to accept that someone might pick up their receiver to check if the line was free. To tell the calls apart, each household was assigned a characteristic ringing code, such as 2 short rings or 1 long ring. When the phone rang, everyone in the house had to pay attention to figure out if it was their call. If you heard a ring that wasn't yours, you might listen in out of curiosity. The easy ability to eavesdrop on snippets of conversation led some people to become curious and listen longer than they should have. This often resulted in unexpected friendships or, conversely, minor neighborhood squabbles. Today, we have cell phones and end-to-end encrypted messaging apps. While modern technology offers absolute privacy, it also erased that sense of intimate community, where everyone, whether accidentally or deliberately, knew about each other's lives. This shared connection, intrusive as it was a thread that bonded the neighborhood in the 1970s. Annual car controls. In the 1970s, driving was a much more physical experience, starting with how you interacted with the car itself. Manual car windows and door locks were simply how cars operated. There were no other options. If you wanted to roll the window down, you grasped the handle and crank it in a steady circle. For kids, rolling down the window was a small arm workout, especially on hot days. The driver had to lean across the seat to roll down the passenger side window or had to manually lock each door. The door locks made a satisfying click when engaged, a solid and reliable sound. Rolling the window down on a hot day filled the car with wind that messed up your hair. There was no automatic air conditioning. Today's push-button convenience is more streamlined and safer, but it eliminated those small tactile moments that defined commuting in the 1970s. It reminds us of a time when physical interaction was necessary to perform even the most basic actions. We've come a long way. What are your thoughts on today's convenience compared to life in the 70s? Share your reflections on this shift in the comments section. Paper maps. Before GPS and smartphones could provide voice directions, paper maps were the necessary and indispensable tools for any long-distance road trip. Maps often lived in the car's glove box, becoming soft and wrinkled from repeated use. Unfolding a paper map was a major challenge. You spread them out into a giant rectangle, sometimes almost obscuring the view, and trace the routes with your finger. Parents would often argue gently about where to turn, while the map lay open on the dashboard under the car's dim lights. Folding them back neatly, Returning them to their original state was a challenge few people ever mastered. Maps weren't just tools, they were companions on an adventure. If you got lost, you had to pull over to the side of the road and patiently consult the map. Today's GPS would seem like an impossible miracle. The convenience of turn-by-turn directions eliminated getting lost, but it also erased a part of the adventure back then, which was finding your own way, relying on map-reading skills and instinct. Paper maps are a legacy of resourcefulness and self-reliance. Do you still keep a wrinkled paper map? Or do you remember the last time you had to stop the car and ask for directions instead of using your phone? Tell me about it in the comments below. Milk delivery. The milkman. In the early 1970s, the sight of glass bottles of milk filled in an insulated box on the doorstep in the morning was still a familiar image. The milkman usually arrived in the early morning, and the clinking of bottles was the sound signaling that breakfast was about to begin. The insulated box was designed to keep the milk cold, where you would find glass bottles with a layer of heavy cream settled on top. In the freezing winter, the liquid inside would sometimes freeze and push the carton or foil cap up like little towers of ice. That was a visual sign of just how cold it was. The milkman didn't just bring milk, they could also bring eggs, butter, or bread, turning them into a small social network. This delivery route created a close connection with neighborhood residents. The milkman wasn't just a salesman. They were often the one who shared neighborhood news and a familiar face that everyone trusted. This service gradually disappeared as large supermarkets emerged and offered cheaper milk. This convenience was replaced, but the satisfied feeling of seeing cold bottles of milk waiting by the door in the morning is a memory that modern technology cannot recreate. Payphones. In an era where cell phones are inseparable items, having to search for a payphone to communicate is almost unimaginable. But in the 1970s, the payphone booth on every street corner was the lifeline of communication when you were away from home. You always needed to carry some loose change. The metal booth offered a strange combination of privacy and public display. The booths often had glass walls and a heavy metal door that never quite closed completely. The smell of metal, paper, and sometimes cigarette smoke was part of the familiar experience. Long-distance calls felt especially important. You had to feed coins into the slot, and there was a characteristic clink of the coins dropping into the slot as your call time began to tick away. If you needed to find a number, the phone book hung on a chain inside the booth, with pages worn thin from repeated use. Now, seeing a payphone is extremely rare. They are only forgotten relics. They remind us of a time when calling someone meant having to find the nearest booth. It was a physical experience requiring effort, but it also brought satisfaction when a crucial call was completed. Mechanical cash registers. The sound of the mechanical cash register was an indispensable part of every purchase transaction in the 70s. Cashiers used these cumbersome machines, which gave a distinctive sound to every purchase. Each key let out a loud clack as the price was manually entered, so accuracy depended entirely on the cashier's skill. After entering the amounts, pulling the lever tallied the total with a satisfying resonant ding. That ding was the signal that the transaction was finished. The mechanical cash register created a tangible rhythm. Change was carefully counted back into your hand, coins clinking one by one. The entire process was a small public performance at the end of every transaction. Today's barcode scanners and contactless payment devices are much faster and more accurate, but they lack the tangible charm and physical interaction that those old machines provided. The feeling of watching your cash being processed right in front of you, hearing the distinct clack and ding, is a connection to the transaction that we have lost in the digital age. Drinking from the garden hose. Drinking water directly from the garden hose was the purest summer refreshment in the 70s. It was a simple habit. No one worried about germs, only about hydration and the sheer joy after playing. You turned on the faucet, letting the initial hot water that had accumulated in the rubber hose run out. Then, You took a long gulp of cold water, bending down and trying to drink straight from the spout. The water tasted slightly metallic with a hint of rubber from the hose, but it was always surprisingly welcomed. The shock of ice-cold water after the initial heat was part of the thrill. The garden hose was the center of outdoor activity. It could turn into a fountain, a water gun, and sometimes an impromptu sprinkler system for running through. Friends took turns passing the hose, sharing this refreshment without worry. In an age before bottled water was common, the hose was as reliable as the sun on a summer day. Today, apprehension about tap water quality and the prevalence of bottled water have made this habit almost disappear. That habit showed a trust in the environment and a carefree nature that the younger generation today struggles to have. Outdoor clotheslines. In the 1970s, outdoor clotheslines were as common as washing machines. Although electric dryers existed, nothing compared to the simple satisfaction of clothes flapping in the wind. This ritual was part of laundry day. You carried the wet, newly washed clothes out in a large basket, walked across the yard, and clipped them to the line using wooden clothespins. The wind turned shirts and dresses into dancing shadows, and you had to constantly check the weather because a sudden rain shower could ruin the whole day's work. Most importantly was the smell of sun-dried sheets, a pure and strongly evocative scent that no fabric softener could match. Towels, after being dried in the wind, became stiff and slightly rough, perfect for scrubbing yourself after a bath. Electric dryers brought weather-independent convenience, but they also took away a simple ritual that connected us to nature and provided a distinctive scent of cleanliness. The disappearance of the clothesline is a trade-off between convenience and the feeling of satisfaction from a job completed under the sun. Manual food mill. Before electric blenders dominated, the manual food mill was a quiet champion in the 70s kitchen. It was a simple but incredibly effective tool that required arm strength and patience. Its design was straightforward: a bowl, a blade, a crank, and a sieve. By turning the crank, you could transform soft vegetables and fruits into smooth purees. When you used it, you felt connected to the process of preparing food. The manual food mill was ideal for making baby food, applesauce, mashed potatoes, and tomato paste. Seeds, skins, and lumps were separated, leaving a perfectly smooth mash. As technology took over, the manual food mill was gradually forgotten, replaced by fast and convenient electric appliances. This shift reminds us that sometimes food tastes better when it is made slowly, one turn at a time, with human participation. Its simplicity and effectiveness are a reminder of the value of manual tools in a world full of machines. Manual TV controls, no remote control. In the 70s, TVs were bulky, heavy pieces of furniture, often called console TVs. And unlike today, if you wanted to change the channel, you had to actually get up and walk over to the set. The concept of a remote control was a luxury or not yet widespread. Kids often became the family's unofficial remote control, sent to change the channel during commercials. Changing the channel wasn't a lazy action, but a small exercise. You had to flip through each channel manually, hearing the loud, satisfying click of the rotary dial as it locked into the next channel. Besides channel changing, old TV sets also had physical dials to fine-tune the picture and sound. If the image was a bit fuzzy or off-color, you had to turn an actual dial to sharpen the picture. To get a better signal, you had to adjust the rabbit ears antenna on top of the TV. This physical interaction with entertainment has nearly disappeared today. The convenience of the modern remote control would have seemed like an unimaginably luxurious gift to the people of the 70s. From old public phone booths to those exciting rides in the back of a truck, the 1970s left an unerasable mark on history. Even though the world has moved far ahead with modern protection technology, the feelings of those sun-drenched summer days, or the taste of water from the garden hose, will always be beautiful pieces of memory kept in everyone's heart. If these stories have brought back wonderful memories of your childhood or youth, please hit like and subscribe to the channel so we can take more meaningful journeys back in time together. Thank you for listening and for joining us in cherishing the values of a time gone by.